All right, so today we're going to dig into something pretty fascinating. We're breaking down an argument that takes an ancient biblical story and uses it to build a really powerful modern case for property rights. It all connects a king's desire for a vineyard thousands of years ago to the debates we're having right now about ownership and inheritance. So, can a story from thousands of years ago really change how we think about property rights today? The source material we're exploring basically says absolutely yes. It argues that this old story doesn't just give us a new perspective, it should completely redefine the whole concept of ownership. Okay, so to really get this, we've got to go way back to the story of a man named Naboth from the book of First Kings in the Bible. And look, this isn't just some random historical detail. For the argument we're examining, this story is everything. It's the foundational case study for the whole position. Now, the source uses a really specific word here, typology. And what that means is, it's not just saying, hey, this is like a modern problem. No, it's arguing this ancient story is the perfect blueprint for a conflict that happens over and over again, the rights of a family versus the power of the state. So let's dive into the story itself, because this is where the source really builds its case. It all kicks off with a piece of land and a neighbor who happens to be, well, the most powerful guy around. The setup is actually pretty simple. You've got King Ahab, the ruler, and he's looking out at his palace grounds, and there's this great vineyard right next door. Super convenient. And he thinks, you know what? I want that. Seems like a pretty standard real estate situation, right? And from Ahab's point of view, he's being totally fair about it. He goes to the owner, a man named Naboth, and makes him what sounds like a solid offer. He says, look, I'll buy it from you, or hey, I'll even trade you for a better vineyard. In his mind, it's just a business deal, a win-win. And this is where the source draws its first big parallel to our world. It argues that Ahab's whole mindset, seeing land as just a thing to be bought and sold, a commodity, is exactly how modern governments often operate, whether it's through things like taxation, regulations, or eminent domain. But that fair offer from the king? It hits a total brick wall, because Naboth's response is what flips this whole story on its head. It shows he's coming from a completely different place with a totally different idea of what ownership even is. So just imagine this for a second. The most powerful person in your country wants your property and is offering you what seems like a great deal. What do? Well, Naboth's answer is what takes this from just a simple squabble over land to, well, something much, much bigger. And there it is. This one sentence is the absolute core of the source's argument. He doesn't haggle. He doesn't say the offer is not good enough. He says he is forbidden to give away the inheritance of my fathers. See that? For him, this vineyard isn't just his. It's a trust, something that's been handed down through generations. This single act of defiance is where the source introduces a really big idea it calls allodial sovereignty. It sounds complex, but here's the gist. It's the principle that your right to own land comes directly from a higher power, not from a government or king. And that makes you not just an owner, but a steward, a caretaker. So from that core idea, the argument gets even more pointed. The source doesn't just suggest a connection to today. Oh no, it draws a very, very direct line. And here it is, laid out side by side. On one side, you have King Ahab, who thinks his power as king trumps everything. On the other side, the source puts the modern governing body. The argument is that they operate from the same playbook. Believing their authority lets them treat land just like any other asset, ignoring that deeper, inherited connection. So what this all boils down to is a clash between two totally different ways of thinking about ownership. We're talking about a fundamental conflict in worldviews here. Let's break this down. In the inheritance model, the one the source is pushing for, the right to property comes from a divine source. That makes owning it a spiritual duty, and the owner is basically a caretaker for the future. But then you have the social contract model. Here, your right to own something comes from an agreement with the government. Property is just a commodity, and you're just a party in a contract. So, wrapping it all up, the source's conclusion really comes down to three main points. 1. Owning land is a spiritual job. 2. The whole point is to protect an inheritance that comes from a higher power. And 3. If you give that up to the government, you're basically saying the state's authority is more important. At the end of the day, the source we've been looking at holds up this ancient story of Naboth as a major, flashing warning sign for today. It's not just a history lesson. It's framed as an urgent plea to completely rethink what it means to own property right now. And that really leaves us with the big question at the heart of this whole argument. It forces you to choose between two completely different ideas. Is ownership just a transaction, like buying groceries? Or is it something much deeper, a sacred trust? According to this line of thinking, how you answer that question changes a whole lot more than just who owns what.